Hello, this is Dr. Ron England, and I am going to go over Python and Excel. Python and Excel, great stuff. Okay, so let's first look at the task I'm going to try to achieve, and hopefully this kind of matches maybe some of the tasks that you're trying to achieve. So let's start first with Excel. Right here, I've got an Excel spreadsheet, and what this is, Excel spreadsheet, is a planner. It's basically we print this and we hand it out to people. And they fill it in by hand, and it's a paper form, but it's a paper form that started with Excel. And the bottom line for this one is it's an advising sheet. So essentially, if a student has taken a specific course, we check here and we say that it's done, that they've taken it. And the courses are in column C, and the done is a check mark that's done by hand, and it's put into the column D. And this works very well. It's a great methodology, and it's easy to put all of this into a nice form as an Excel spreadsheet, even though it's really just there to print it. Okay, now our goal is to fill this out automatically, which, is like, whoa, I'm going to actually fill in an Excel spreadsheet automatically, and then I'm actually printing it out with a lot of the stuff already entered into it. So to do that, first thing we got to do is we've got to get a hold of the data. Now, luckily where we are at, we've got this ability to query and get the results of the queries in Excel, which is a fairly common thing. I mean, getting results in Excel or as a CSV file or as some sort of format is a fairly common thing to be able to do. But the reality of this is that we have information about the students based on their identifier, which is their ID, and we can actually look through all the fields that are here, but the fields contain the courses that they've taken, the term that they've taken, and the grade that they've gotten. So with those pieces of information, we've got everything that we need to be able to then go into this other spreadsheet and fill out the information. Of course, the logic would be that I've got to go ahead and figure out what those things are. So what's a good approach to go ahead and try to do this automatically? Well, let's go with the wonderful, let's see if we can do this in Python. Well, one of the reasons I'm using Python and not like VBA is because this is a lecture on Python. So let's go over here to my handy dandy and faithful Spider, and let's look at some of the things that we can do to make this work. Well, first is I'm going to need a couple of the utilities that I'm going to have to import some libraries to make this happen. And I'm going to be using two of them. And kind of using two of them because I'm going to demonstrate two of them. So I'm going to use Pandas and then another one called OpenPyXL. So basically, they're both utilities that allow us to work with Python and Excel. And I'm going to first go down here to the gut level code and say, hey, you know what? Let's look to see how this might look from the standpoint of how do I just use the functions that I'm going to write. I'm going to show you how the functions are written, but first I'm going to show you, let's try to make it so that the code is relatively straightforward. So what we want to do is take a single student, pull the data out of that query spreadsheet, and put it into the other spreadsheet, which is the planner. So I'm going to have the user input the student ID, and then I'm going to have a function called getStudentData. And the student data is going to pull the information from queryReport.xlsx, which is that big query, and return what we need as a data frame. With that data frame, I'm then going to pass it over to another function that is then going to read the check down in this here, and it's going to fill it in and save it. So let's look at this. Okay, so first function I'm going to look at is getStudentData. And to do this, I'm going to use the Pandas function readExcel, and I'm going to read Excel from the spreadsheet that contains all the data. And I've already gone ahead and filtered on specific columns using the use calls simply to make the read Excel a little bit simpler, that data frame, so that I can actually look at it on a screen, because there was a lot of columns there. So I'm going to just pull the columns that I actually specifically need. So as you can see, that read Excel can be very handy. I'm going to read the Excel. What you do is you pass it the file name, and then you tell it which sheet you're going to work with, and then you tell it what columns, and it's going to read all the spreadsheet back into a data frame. Now that I've read it back into a data frame, I'm going to drop the NAs. There's a whole bunch of knotted numbers in there that I don't need. I'm going to drop those rows, and I'm also going to drop a lot of stuff that I also don't need. So the first thing that I'm going to drop that's really important is I'm going to use the data frame drop function to drop every ID that is not the ID of the student that I'm looking for. I'm passing the student ID for the one I'm looking for over to the function, and I'm going to drop the ones that are not that. So if you notice, I've got the drop function, which contains in here, this is going to identify what it is that we want to drop. So that allows me to use a piece of Boolean logic. This is going to return a list, and this list is going to be able to be compared against the student IDs, and if it's not equal to the student IDs, it gets dropped. Then I also am going to drop all the courses that were a grade F, FN, or a W because, well, I'm not going to say that the student has taken the course if it's an F, FN, or a W. And then I'm just simply going to return the data frame. So first, let's go ahead and import these to Pandas and OpenXYL, PYXL. So I've got the libraries I need. Let's go ahead and toss this function into the compiler. So that function is now tossed into the compiler. And then let's go down here and let's just look and see how this works. Okay, so I've got right here, and I've got a student ID that's in the that I've got right here that's in the function. I'm going to go ahead and execute this code right here where I asked for that student ID. I'm going to call the function, and then I'm going to output the results. So boom. Okay, student ID I'm going to use is right here. Enter. And the first thing that's going to happen is I see that it tells me that it can't find query report. Well, that's a pretty simple thing. And that's actually the reason I brought that one up is because this happens all the times with my students is they're like, I can't get read Excel to work. And I'm always like, well, did you look in the correct directory to find it? So I'm going to use the File Explorer, and I'm going to go into the directory that and I could put the entire path in here. That would do the same thing, but I'm just going to go ahead and set it to that directory. So I've got a directory where that is at, and I'm going to put it in there. And now I'm going to run the whole thing again. Let's see, boom. And I'm going to enter the ID. Oh, whoops. Enter the correct ID. And it actually output the information. I'll pull this over a little bit so you can see it. It took the information, and this is actually ran that function that we just took a look at here. And what it did was it dropped the F's, FNs, and W's, kept the grades that actually can be used, and it returned this as a data frame. And the data frame is what I printed out. So if you look down here, you can see that I just did print data frame 1. Okay. Now, I have another function that I'm going to use to create the student file, and let's look at that function for right now. And I'm going to use another library for this one. I'm going to use the OpenPyXL. So I'm not using Pandas anymore for this one. I'm going to actually use a different one, and it has a different way of behaving, but it's a very good. OpenPyXL is an excellent library for working with Excel, especially if you have to write to Excel. So the first thing you do is you open a workbook from the file name. Then you're going to go ahead and set up a worksheet. The worksheet's going to be the active worksheet, which is sheet 1 in this case, which is only one sheet in the file. And this is actually going to open the checkdown spreadsheet, this one over here. So let me bring this back over. It's going to, because I've got the student data in the data frame, now I want to go through here and I want to actually put in these fields here if they've completed it so that I've started to pre-fill out the planner. All right, so let's put this into memory, and then I'm going to go through a little bit of the logic that's occurring here. I open this, I set the worksheet to active. I've got, by the way, I'm going to go through individual rows at a time in the worksheet, and this WS2, which is the active worksheet, has a function called cell where I can pass it the row and the column that I have. And once that once I pass it the row and the column, I can return back the value. And in this case, that value is going to come back as a string. And and it's actually going to come back as something that I can convert to a string, but I'm going to bring it back as a string. And I only want the first 7 characters of that string. So some of the characters were longer than 7. And the reason for that is simply that the other spreadsheet has 7 characters to identify a course. And this one's going to have 7 characters to identify a course. If the first 7 characters of the two match, then it's the same course, and we're fine. So this is going to be inside of one loop, and it's going to loop through all of the classes that are in the worksheet that I need to fill out. Then it's going to go through in an inner loop, and it's going to iterate through the data frame. It's going to do iterrows as the function to iterate through all the rows of the data frame. So for each row of the data frame, I'm going to have for row in the data frame dot iterrows. And iterrows is an iteration of all of the rows in the data frame. Then I'm going to create a variable called taken, and the taken is going to be equal to the subject column plus the catalog column. Well, the reason for that is that spreadsheet has the first part, like in this case the MAC, in a separate column than the 1105, which is in a different column, but this spreadsheet has them both in the same column. So I have to concatenate the two together, and that's going to be assigned to the variable taken. So that means that is a course that they have actually taken. And I can see that if I come back over to here and look at the data frame, I can see that I've got subject and catalog as separate columns. This is good because I've got these pieces to demonstrate the things that you might have to do to get to how to do the combination and how to bring them together. Also notice that this is row 1 and then subject, because the inner rows returns a tuple, and in the tuple, the first row, which is actually the second row because it starts at 0, is the row that contains the information that is the data. Okay, that's kind of important because it's a little bit harder to figure out. But if you were actually just to print out the row itself, it would tell you in the printout of the row that these are tuples. And you'd look at the second tuple, which is tuple 1, you would see that it actually is the information, the data that you want. Well, the next step that you do is you check to see if the course that you've read from one spreadsheet is equal to the course that the student has taken. And if that is the case, we're going to go back over to here and put in column 4 the semester that they took it. So that's going to say, to do that, I'm going to go to the worksheet, use the cell function again, and this time it's the row that you're on, and the column 4, and set the value equal to the value from the data frame, which is the term. And now I'm going to go ahead and rename the file. I brought it in as blank worksheet file name, but I'm going to rename the file to add on information about which student it belongs to. So I'm actually going to just change the file name, and then I'm going to go ahead and use the WP2 save, and I'm going to return file to save. I'm going to return the file name so that you can see what it is. So now if I come down here, I've already printed up the data frame, so now I'm going to just run the last 2 pieces. By the way, the name of the spreadsheet is BSET Checkdown. I'm going to Control Enter, and it's going to come over here, and I noticed that I did print it out, and you can see that it says student information saved to BSET Checkdown _ and then the student ID number. And if I go over to, oops, I'm going to have to go ahead and bring up File Manager. If I go to File Manager and I go into the location, there it is, BSET Checkdown, and if I opened that spreadsheet, it now contains it, and there, in this case, I didn't want it to take a while running, so there really is only one class, but I put in the term that the specific class was taken, and the whole thing is filled out. Now, what does this mean? I mean, why is this even important? Why do you care? Well, there are often times and situations where you've got data in one location that needs to be transposed to data in the other location. But here's the beauty of this. Instead of having a human do this by hand for the 1,000 students that we have and create a nice check down list for them, I can run a single query, execute this. Now, I only did one, but that doesn't mean that you only have to do one. I can easily create an iteration and run through this for every student in a program and then have beautiful printouable spreadsheets of the data for that specific individual student. Okay, what it means is it's a high level of productivity. I just saved 3 people an entire 2 weeks worth of work because that's what it would have taken for them to do this. And I can run this and it takes about 20 minutes to run. It did take me a couple hours to program it, but 2 hours and 20 minutes worth of work versus 3 people for an entire 2 weeks is a tremendous savings in productivity. So your ability to manipulate things like Excel files or CSV files or use these libraries has a tremendous effect on the productivity of any workplace. So as a programmer, what you're doing is you're saving a lot of people a lot of work. The other thing is if they make a mistake in the way that they want to do it, or somebody says, well, that's great, can you do it this other way? Well, to me, that's just adding or subtracting a line of code. For them, it's another tremendous amount of work and effort. So as you can see, it's really important. But what I did do is I demonstrated a practical use of Python, 2 separate Python libraries dealing with access to Excel, and an actual real live application of how to do this and how it's important. So hopefully this was useful to you, and hopefully you got a little bit out of it. Good programming. I've gone over the time that I typically allot myself to explain these things. You're almost at 17 minutes, but hopefully it was very useful to you. Thanks.